Hi, I'm Briana from the Interledger Foundation, where I am the Executive Director.
And hi, I'm Harriet Kingaby. I'm co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network. And we're here today to talk about alternatives to digital advertising. So whether there ever can be mainstream alternatives to some of the invasive techniques we see today. So Briana, I'd love to kick off our discussion today by asking you a little bit about Interledger, how it works, and really kind of why you got involved and what made you so passionate about it.
So Interledger is an open source interoperable payment network that sends payments across different ledgers. So those ledgers can originate from anything from a regular bank account to a blockchain account. And the reason why this is important is because right now, the way financial systems are set up, it's very siloed. So it makes moving money between them very clunky and cumbersome. And then once you get on the subject of trying to do cross-border payments, it becomes even more problematic. So the Interledger protocol solves this problem. The goal of Interledger is to move money as fast and as cheap as it is to move data across the internet. And someone said this, and I keep sticking to the saying, it's like the Swiss Army knife of payments. It just has the capabilities to do a multitude of things and to help enrich people's lives. And so that is what really attracted me to this project and to working at the foundation. I'm a newbie to the world of payments, but I am very passionate about every role that I'm in, that it's making a difference in people's lives. And Interledger just has the capacity to do that. And so I was really excited about it when I learned about it. And so I said, I have to be involved in this in some way. So Harriet, you just completed a fellowship at Mozilla. Can you share your experience with the program and how it relates to the work that you're doing at the Conscious Advertising Network?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Conscious Advertising Network is an organization that I co-founded about 3 years ago. And we've got a mission to ensure the ethics catches up with the technology of modern advertising. And basically, we look at 6 different areas, and they include things you'd expect from advertising. So, are the advertising techniques complying with data protection legislation? But we also look at things like defunding hate speech and disinformation. We look at ensuring children's welfare online, and we look at how advertising can promote diversity and inclusion in a meaningful way. And you'd think that these principles, these techniques, they're enshrined within the human rights, the UN Declaration of Human Rights. You think they'd be, kind of core business practices, but unfortunately they're not. And what we see is that the current technologies that have been used to buy and sell advertising online, a little bit like an online auction every time we surf the web, they sound really kind of straightforward. We attract around the web. Advertising is targeted to us, and the processes behind it make sure that the advertising is genuinely targeted to us. But unfortunately, that's causing all sorts of issues. And like you said around the human element, there's a huge human and environmental impact of some of the decisions that are being made. So my work with Mozilla was very much looking at what happens when you add AI into the mixture. So we've got these current algorithmic-based technologies, and what happens suddenly if you've got machine learning in the mix, or if you've got an emotional facial recognition in the mix. And what we found, perhaps unsurprisingly, is actually when you start to add those technologies in, is that it increases the possibility of harm. So the work that I was doing was looking at those harms, looking at things like emotional recognition being used to target advertising, for example, and just what that means. And it was a big call to action to the industry, really, to get ahead of this and to do something about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I brought up before about how the facial recognition doesn't even recognize people of color sometimes. So that's a huge problem. So how are you working with advertisers to address this?
Absolutely. So when you start to use technologies with the bias that's already enshrined within them, it creates, it has these huge ripple effects and impacts. So with CAN, what we've tried to do is we've looked at, we see advertising money as a resource, really. Like $330 billion each year is spent online, and that funds things from fabulous journalism. It funds things from super creators on YouTube, but it also funds the really bad stuff. So it funds things like hate speech preachers. Hate speech and disinformation, in fact, have a funding model through online advertising, and that is just not okay. So what we try and do is we've created these 6, we call them manifestos, but they're basically roadmaps. And what we try and do is point advertisers at initiatives that they can join, use, whatever, embed, that will stop them from doing things like defunding particular community media. Like 73% of LGBTQ plus online content is rendered unmonetizable because advertisers are really risk averse, and they have these terrible block lists, which include words like lesbian. So loads of media for that community is defunded. So what we try and do is we try and highlight these issues, and we try and use the manifestos to create roadmaps so advertisers can use this, and they can create new systems that stop this from happening, or they can at least question the systems that they've already got. And we've been doing that for about 3 years, and we're seeing changes, but there's still an awful lot to be done. Which brings me to I'm really interested about how new web monetization techniques like Interledger can help consumers and creators kind of address this kind of wealth distribution issue. Because one of the issues that obviously we see is that advertisers are defunding huge parts of the internet. We had issues where advertising money wasn't even reaching kind of good journalism, because advertisers were defunding kind of coronavirus news. Yeah. And we've got the issue where on the platforms, huge amounts of revenue are kind of taken away from creators by the platforms themselves. So we've got this huge issue with the distribution of wealth. I know you're really passionate about it. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so as you were saying, like 70% of advertising dollars go to 2 to 3 of the biggest platforms that are out there. And so that's billions of dollars going to 2 or 3 companies, while leaving smaller creators out in the cold and unable to make a meaningful profit off of the work. In addition to that, they also sell their users' information, so there's no privacy. And for me as a consumer, like, I don't like that idea. I don't like if I Google something and I go to another platform and the exact same thing that I Googled is there. So one of the capabilities of Interledger is to stream micropayments from one account to another. And so a micropayment could be a fraction of a cent. And so how that works with web monetization, it allows you as a creator to receive micropayments for every second that someone spends on your site. And so for me as a consumer, I in turn get to support my favorite blog or my cooking channel or my favorite photographer, while also maintaining my privacy. And so the more users that we get on the platform that are more interested in this, the more money it allows the small creator to make. So just imagine someone who is like in a small remote area that is able to make money off of the content they create. So it gives them more space to be creative and make more content. So yeah, that's how web monetization works. And they have Coil, that is a web monetization provider right now. Cinnamon Video, which is kind of like a web monetized version of YouTube, and Puma Browser, which is just basically has web monetization built into the browser natively. So that's basically how it works. And so as we're talking how this advertising is failing creators, in a way, and leaving so many people out in the cold, you know, makes you think about like what can be done about this? How can we address this issue? And how are you working to address that issue at CAN?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because like you said, we can reform advertising, but advertising is still, you know, you can reform advertising, and that is still a kind of capitalist way of funding the internet. I am still assumed to be a consumer all the time when I'm online, even though actually in my daily life, I am only a consumer some of the time. So, you know, if I go for a walk in the park, in the park, I'm not a consumer unless I'm looking at my phone and engaging with a shopping site. So for me, there's this really problematic thing of, we can reform advertising, but that will never fix the problem of all these commercial imperatives that kind of advertising brings. And those commercial kind of imperatives and lenses are actually shaping the internet in some kind of quite scary ways. Mm-hmm. So, for example, as journalists and newspapers struggle for revenue, they try and change the way that they present information, change the way they write headlines, the ordering of information in an article, in order to A, get people to click on those headlines, so you see the clickbait that we see, and B, also to kind of keep them on a page. So those recipe sites that you see, that's a whole story about how someone first ate this cookie 20 years ago at their grandma's, and the recipe's right at the bottom. And of course, that's to show you more ads on the page. And it's dangerous when it gets to journalism, because journalism is what speaks truth to power in theory, and it's also really not great for us as users, because the internet is being shaped with these commercial imperatives in mind. So I think what we do at CAN is very much around trying to get advertisers to, as I said, think about this resource, think really carefully about where they're spending it, and making sure that they're not spending it in places where the hate speech, the disinformation, the real junk is.
Yeah.
But even if we fix that, we wouldn't fix some of the problems that you've described. Another side effect of advertising, this kind of trying to always generate advertising revenue, for example, is that you have creators in some parts of the world who are creating content not in their native language but in English, because it'll have a bigger market. Mm-hmm. And so you're impacting entire cultures who just can't just can't make money out of this model. So I'm really excited by things like the web monetization and kind of techniques you've described. And it's great that there's an easy way in, because I'm not a technical person. So when we start to talk about micropayments, I'm like, oh gosh, what does this mean? So it's wicked to hear that's being made simple, and there's like these simple processes in place.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, what you spoke to, it's censorship. It's really censorship, and they're guiding what we're able to see and what we're able to consume. And I think that a lot of people are sick of it. So hence the reason why 25 to 30% of people now use ad blockers. So that just shows you that, yes, people are ready for a change in the system. And I believe that a new model would definitely be able to go mainstream when it's introduced. So especially with web monetization. So let's see. I lost my train of thought when I was getting ready to ask you.
No worries. Well, I was just thinking about what you said about that censorship thing, and there's been I don't know if you have similar debates in the States at the moment, but here in the UK there's this huge debate around whether advertisers should have a say in what happens on news channels in particular, because we have a new news channel that's going to be started up, and it's being billed as being like Fox. And there's a big one of the campaign groups over here has tries to raise awareness. So there's a big debate. I have well-formed opinions on that, but we have this kind of concern that kind of risk-averse advertisers could be influencing editorial kind of policy in some way. And like what you said around censorship, like the last thing that I want is for risk-averse advertisers to be, kind of censoring the voices out there. And I think that's a really massive, that's a massive discussion. And that's why, as well as reforming advertising, we need this. We need something new to change the funding model of the internet. But that being said, obviously, I still feel that strongly that advertisers should never be funding hate speech and disinformation, and that's a red line.
Not at all. And I'm going to put this out there, Harriet. I don't know how you feel about this. I believe if you had less advertising, for me, I would spend less money as well. Because if I see something, on the side, like, oh, this catches my attention, and it takes away from what I was doing as well. So, yeah, I just think it's crazy. So, one thing I wanted to talk about was how easy it is to engage with web monetization, implement the tech on a site. So a lot of people, like you said, I'm not really technical. How do I do this as a blogger? But the way that Coil makes it, it's really easy. All you have to do is go on and embed a code into your site. And for me, as a consumer, all you have to do is go in and put in your credit card information for $5 a month. You don't even have to use both your first and last name. So it makes it really easy. It makes it really private, and you get a really seamless experience when you're going on a site. So if you install Coil, the Coil extension, any site that is also on Coil, it just automatically will start streaming the payments based on how long you're on the site. So it's a really seamless and easy way to start using web monetization. That's
really great. I mean, I think, so with this, I think the technology, the interface, it makes so much sense. And it feels like that's me making a choice around, ensure, again, kind of making sure that the creators that I love get what they need from it. What's been your journey through this topic? Have you how have you got here from previous work?
How have I got here from previous work? So in all of the work that I've done, like I said, it's really important for me to be involved in something that I care about. Just working for just a large corporation, that me and my personality, it just wouldn't work. And so when I was introduced to Interledger, I didn't know what it was. And so I had to go and do a lot of research about what exactly is this and how is it helpful. And the more I saw it, I was like, this just makes sense. This really makes sense. And why isn't everyone on board with this? And I'm very passionate about it to the point where I'm like, I don't even care if I'm working with the organization. I still want to be able to let people know about it. Everyone that I tell about web monetization and Interledger and how it works with the open payments, they're like, okay, this is great. Why haven't I heard about it? So that's really my journey and how I came involved with it. So what about you and CAN? How did you become involved with CAN and with the work that you're doing right now around the climate?
Yeah, gosh, so yeah, I'm not supposed to, I was never supposed to work in advertising. I always wanted to work in kind of climate change, kind of campaigning and communications. And the way that what started happening was I started working on more and more digital campaigns, and I started to see we started to just hit walls, basically. So either we, actually, money talks online. So if I've got a £10,000 media budget, I can reach certain people. If I've got £1 million media budget, I can reach a lot of people. And unfortunately, when you look at the money going into some of these systems, you can see that there's a lot of money kind of going into some of the denial spaces. So I got more and more interested in technology and the structure of the internet and how and how that works. And from that perspective as well, there are dark ways you can use advertising to divert conversations, to disrupt, and all sorts of stuff. So actually I came to CAN through that slightly odd journey, and having worked in kind of branding and by proxy advertising from a kind of content perspective, and got really interested in, and ended up doing the Mozilla Fellowship. So it was that route when I started to kind of actually be impacted by some of the monetized disinformation online, and be impacted by some of the fallout from some of these from some of these issues. And I think what makes me super passionate about CAN is that if we can divert a little bit of $330 billion to something better, to organizations, to creators, to journalists, to just the great stuff that is on the internet, if we can just divert a bit of that money, then I will be happy, and I think that we will have a much healthier internet. And like I said, I don't think it's going to fix all the problems. I think that we have to reform the old and we have to build the new at the same time. But if we do that, the internet is going to be a healthier place, and a more inclusive place, and a more accessible place. And thinking about that, like how is Interledger kind of working towards building a more inclusive web?
Yeah, so one of the ways that Interledger is working to spread the word of web monetization, we created a program called Grant for the Web, which is giving away $100 million in grant funds to start building on web monetization, start building on creating more users in this ecosystem. And part of that is we look at the space and how can we reach people who typically are left outside, because sometimes it's hard to find a lot of diversity, especially in tech. And so that is something that we're very, very focused on, especially this year. And we have given money away to some really great projects. Just recently, the IDGA Foundation, we partnered with them to create the Diverse Game Developers Fund, where it's giving away $500,000 to game developers and students worldwide. Another one is Ushahidi, and that is web monetizing deployments on a crowdsourcing platform. So in Kenya, that's been used for like crisis response, human rights protections. So we're really trying to get into areas that have been previously marginalized. And so try to get people in the ecosystem who have not been able to participate before. So speaking of that, how you're saying advertisers are conservative, how are you working with them to be more inclusive in the work that they're doing?
Yeah, so from a funding perspective, what we kind of advocate is having things like, we call them inclusion lists. So there is, if you think about the internet, like there's the walled gardens, there's your Googles and your Facebooks, and then there's the open web is huge. And most people spend a lot of their time in the walled gardens. They log on to Twitter or to Facebook or to YouTube when they use the web. But the open web is huge. And there are fantastic sites on there. There's, the New York Times is on there. There's, there's all sorts of brilliant stuff. But there is a lot of rubbish on there as well. And I think a lot of what we ask organizations to do is to really think carefully about the open web and say, well, what do we actually want to fund? And add those to inclusion lists. So that, and those inclusion lists are helpful as well, because we've talked about block listing. If you've got a blanket word like, lesbian was one of the ones that was most frequently used, on a study that Vice did a couple of years ago. Then those inclusion lists help get around that problem, because you can then say, okay, well, this is good quality, LGBTQ plus media, for example. We can add those. So and there's our members. We've got an organisation called Brand Advance, whose whole reason of being is to help advertising money reach community media. So we work with organisations like that to really raise awareness and to point them to the right solutions. In terms of diversity and inclusion, we look at diversity and inclusion, as I said, in the media spend, but also in the organisation itself, because diverse creatives create better work, and it's and it's just much better for the quality of the advertising for the entire world, basically. So again, we work with partners who focus on diversity and inclusion. We work with an organisation called Advertising, who do a lot around LGBTQ plus representation in advertising. We work with an organisation called Creative Equals, who offer training, who conduct research, who are brilliant in this space. So we try and be as partner orientated as possible, because I don't know if you've ever sat on an ad tech talk, but there are so many acronyms. It's such a complicated technical area, and like nobody can understand all of it. That was a big learning when I started in the space of just being able to go, I have no idea what they're talking about, and that is okay. Right. But we do realise that actually we're stronger as a coalition. So we always make sure our membership is partially advertisers, partially agencies, but lots of civil society members as well to hold us to account. So, for example, we have our hate speech manifesto was written by a conglomerate of advertisers, agencies, anti-hate charities, organisations that represent affected communities, like the works. Because we believe that if you get the right people around the table, you have better problem definition and better, solutions can be created. And from my perspective, if you've got advertisers talking to advertisers about a problem that affects me, I kind of want to be in on that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It's really great work that you're doing, Harriet, and I'm so glad that you've taken the time to talk with me, not just today, but the other day, about what the work that you're doing. And I think that with us all working together to try to solve this issue, that soon we should have a viable solution to the issues that we face today. So.
I totally agree, Briana. It's been so good. It's been so good to talk to you about all of this and to think through like these different positions. I just think we're gonna, if there is a big movement behind this, and I think that with all the stuff that you're doing at Interledger, things are going to change.
Thank you. I think that's it.